네, 어, 우리 인공지능과 법 이제 세 번째 시간 이어서 하고 있습니다. 우리 제이넵의 그 인공지능 시대에 더 중요해진 인간 윤리 어떻게 잘 보셨어요? 알고리즘이라고 하는 것을 기계 학습 시스템이라고 이제 이분은 말씀하시면서 갖가지 사례를 들어서 사실 이제 로봇공학 3원칙, 4원칙 이야기하면서 로봇에다가 로봇의 책임을 이렇게 전가하는 이제 그런 것들을 좀 예둘러서 좀 비판하는 것 같아요. 오히려 인간의 윤리가 더 중요해진 거 아니냐. 기계한테 왜 자꾸 로봇에게 왜 자꾸 그 책임을 넘기느냐. 뭐 이런 그 취지로 저는 읽혀지더라고요. 여러분은 어떻게 생각하셨어요? 자, 어쨌든 자, 로봇 윤리 지침이라고 하는 것을 조금 보자면 2006년도에 이제 로봇 윤리 로드맵을 유럽에서 제안을 했고 2008년에 우리나라는 이제 대한민국 로봇법에 따라서 로봇 윤리 현장안을 만들었죠. 그리고 2014년에 유럽 로봇법 컨소시엄에서 로봇공학 규제에 관한 가이드라인을 제시해서 또 2017년 미국은 또 인공지능 23개 원칙을 제시했고요. 결국 우리가 이제 아까 봤던 2017년 이제 유럽 로봇법 로봇 가이드라인이 만들어졌고요. 2019년에는 이제 대한민국 로봇 기본법이 또 발의된 이런 수세로 이제 지금 한참 논의가 뜨거운데요. 자, 여기서 이제 알고리즘이에요. 결국에는 여러분. 사실 이제 그 영화나 이런 데서는 이제 마치 로봇 그 인간의 모습을 하는 이제 그런 것들을 많이 비춰주지만 우리 일상생활에는 알고리즘이 문제라는 거죠. 아까 이제 그 테드 영상에서 보셨듯이 그럼 알고리즘은 그럼 어떻게 나온 거냐라는 걸 이야기 좀 드리면 그 페르시아 지금의 이란이죠. 페르시아의 수학자인 그 알카리즈미라는 사람의 이름에서 유래됐다라고 해요. 알카리즈미를 이제 영어로 이제 변형하는 과정에서 알고리즘이라는 것이 나온 거죠. 이것은 이제 데이터를 처리하는 규칙이라고 할 수 있고요. 또 거피는 이제 이렇게 정의를 했어요. 컴퓨터 혹은 디지털 대상이 과업을 수행하는 방법에 대한 설명으로 명확히 정의된 한정된 개수의 규제나 명령의 집합이다. 조금 이제 번역하다 보니까 이제 이렇게 번역이 되는 것 같은데요. 한마디로 이야기하면 어, 일정한 어떤 규칙을 이야기하는 거예요. 컴퓨터가 빅데이터를 처리하는 규칙 이런 것을 말하는데 그래서 이제 그 알고리즘이 실제로는 그 현실의 법처럼 기능한다. 아까 테드 영상에도 보셨듯이 여러분 이제 뭐 페이스북이나 아니면 뭐 구글이나 이런 거 검색할 때 뭐 유튜브가 대표적이죠. 유튜브 같은 데 보면 자기가 예전에 봤던 거, 좋아요 눌렀던 거, 뭐 이런 거 있으면 그것과 관련된 영상을 좋아할 만한 것들을 쭉 보여주는 거죠. 그래서 로렌스 레시라고 하는 이제 미국의 그 법학자, 이제 로스쿨 교수님이신데요. 이분은 code is law 이렇게 이야기를 합니다. 그래서 알고리즘이 법처럼 기능한다라는 거예요. 근데 문제는 이제 이분의 책이에요. 옆에 있는 건 이제 code 그리고 code 2.0 해서 이제 이분이 쓴 것인데요. 그리고 code and other laws of the cyberspace 그리고 뭐그 버전 2.0에서 code 그래서 Bill of Rights, 권리장전 이렇게 이제 써 있네요. 컴퓨터 시대의 어떤 디지털 시대의 뭐 인권 권리장전 이런 느낌이죠. 그래서 알고리즘이 과연 공정하고 중립적이고 객관적이냐? 아까 이제 영상에도 봤듯이 우리 인사채용 시스템을 그래 우리는 인공지능에 맡겼어. 그러니까 객관적이고 공정한 결과가 나올 거야 하는데 사실은 거기 이제 빅데이터를 넣어줘야 되거든요. 근데 그런 것도 또 그런 과정에서 인간의 어떤 편향이 들어가지 않을 수 있겠냐라는 거예요. 알고리즘의 자동화된 의사결정에서 보면 우선순위를 결정하고 또 카테고리, 즉 분류를 하고 또 매치를 시키는 거죠. 관련성을 짓고 필터링하는 과정에서 인간의 의사 개입에 따른 오류나 편향성, 검열 등이 자연스럽게 들어갈 수 있다는 거죠. 그래서 알고리즘은 과연 공정하고 중립적이고 객관적이냐는 질문은 쉽게 그렇다라고 대답하기가 이제 어려워진 현실에 놓여 있다는 거예요. 자, 이게 결국에는 이제 인간이 판단해야 될 문제인데 그걸 이제 그뭐 인공지능이 했다라고 해서 우리가 책임을 넘길 수 있느냐라는 것이 이제 로봇 윤리에서 아주 중요한 대목입니다. 이것과 관련해서 이제 제가 말씀드린 이제 레리 레시익은 법률이 창조성을 질식시킨다고 말한다. 뭐 좀 전에 말씀드린 이제 그 법학자이신데요. 한번 같이 영상을 또 보도록 하겠습니다.
I want to talk to you a little bit about user-generated content. I'm going to tell you 3 stories on the way to 1 argument that's going to tell you a little bit about how we open user-generated content up for business. So here's the first story. 1906, this man, John Philip Sousa, traveled to this place, the United States capital, to talk about this technology, what he called the, quote, talking machines. Sousa was not a fan of the talking machines. This is what he had to say. These talking machines are going to ruin artistic development of music in this country. When I was a boy, in front of every house in the summer evenings, you would find young people together singing the songs of the day or the old songs. Today, you hear these infernal machines going night and day. We will not have a vocal cord left, Sousa said. The vocal cords will be eliminated by a process of evolution, as was the tale of man when he came from the ape. Now, this is the picture I want you to focus on. This is a picture of culture. We could describe it, using modern computer terminology, as a kind of read-write culture. It's a culture where people participate in the creation and the recreation of their culture. In that sense, it's read-write. Sousa's fear was that we would lose that capacity because of these, quote, infernal machines. They would take it away. And in its place, we'd have the opposite of read-write culture, what we could call read-only culture. Culture where creativity was consumed, but the consumer is not a creator. A culture which is top-down, owned, where the vocal cords of the millions have been lost. Now, as you look back at the 20th century, at least in what we think of as the, quote, developed world, hard not to conclude that Sousa was right. Never before in the history of human culture had it been as professionalized, never before as concentrated, never before has creativity of the millions been as effectively displaced, and displaced because of these, quote, infernal machines. The 20th century was that century where, at least for those places we know best, culture moved from this read-write to read-only existence. So second, land is a kind of property. It's protected by law. As Lord Blackstone described it, land is protected by trespass law. For most of the history of trespass law, by presuming it protects the land all the way down below and to an indefinite extent upwards. That was a pretty good system for most of the history of the regulation of land until this technology came along. And people began to wonder, were these instruments trespassers as they flew over land without clearing the rights of the farms below as they traveled across the country? Well, in 1945, Supreme Court got a chance to address that question. 2 farmers, Thomas Lee and Teenie Cosby, who raised chickens, had a significant complaint because of these technologies. The complaint was that their chickens followed the pattern of the airplanes and flew themselves into the walls of the barn when the airplanes flew over the land. And so they appealed to Lord Blackstone to say these airplanes were trespassing. Since time immemorial, the law had said you can't fly over the land without permission of the landowner. So this flight must stop. Well, the Supreme Court considered this 100 years tradition and said, in an opinion written by Justice Douglas, that the Cosbys must lose. The Supreme Court said the doctrine protecting land all the ways to the sky has no place in the modern world. Otherwise, every transcontinental flight would subject the operator to countless trespass suits. Common sense, a rare idea in the law, but here it was. Common sense revolts at the idea. Common sense. Finally, before the internet, the last great terror to rain down on the content industry was a terror created by this technology, broadcasting. A new way to spread content, and therefore a new battle over the control of the businesses that would spread content. Now, at that time, the entity, the legal cartel that controlled the performance rights for most of the music that would be broadcast using these technologies was ASCAP. They had an exclusive license on the most popular content, and they exercised it in a way that tried to demonstrate to the broadcasters who really was in charge. So between 1931 and 1939, they raised rates by some 448%. Until the broadcasters finally got together and said, okay, enough of this. And in 1939, a lawyer, Sidney Kay, started something called Broadcast Music Incorporated. You know it as BMI. And BMI was much more democratic in the art that it would include within its repertoire, including African American music for the first time in the repertoire. But most important was that BMI took public domain works and made arrangements of them which they gave away for free to their subscribers. So that in 1940, when ASCAP threatened to double their rates, the majority of broadcasters switched to BMI. Now, ASCAP said they didn't care. The people will revolt, they predicted, because the very best music was no longer available because they had shifted to the second best public domain provided by BMI. Well, they didn't revolt. And in 1941, ASCAP cracked. And the important point to recognize is that even though these broadcasters were broadcasting something you would call second best, that competition was enough to break, at that time, this legal cartel over access to music. Okay, 3 stories. Here's the argument. In my view, the most significant thing to recognize about what this internet is doing is its opportunity to revive the read-write culture that Sousa romanticized. Digital technologies is the opportunity for the revival of these vocal cords that he spoke so passionately to Congress about. User-generated content, spreading in businesses in extraordinarily valuable ways like these, celebrating amateur culture, by which I don't mean amateurish culture. I mean culture where people produce for the love of what they're doing and not for the money. I mean the culture that your kids are producing all the time. For when you think of what Sousa romanticized in the young people together singing the songs of the day of the old songs, you should recognize what your kids are doing right now. Taking the songs of the day and the old songs and remixing them to make them something different. It's how they understand access to this culture. So let's have some very few examples to get a sense of what I'm talking about here. Here's something called anime music videos. First example, taking anime captured from television, re-edited to music tracks.
Phenomena. Phenomena. Phenomena.
This one you should be confident. Jesus survives, don't worry. And this is the best.
My love, there's only you in my life, the only thing that's right.
My first love, your every breath that I take, your every step I make.
And I want to share all my love with you. No one else will do.
And your eyes,
They tell me how much you care. Oh.
Read my lips, take dictation.
So this is Remix, right? And it's important to emphasize that what this is not what we call, quote, piracy. I'm not talking about nor justifying people taking other people's content in wholesale and distributing it without the permission of the copyright owner. I'm talking about people taking and recreating, using other people's content, using digital technologies to say things differently. Now, the importance of this is not the technique that you've seen here. Because, of course, every technique that you've seen here is something that television and film producers have been able to do for the last 50 years. The importance is that that technique has been democratized. It is now anybody with access to a $1,500 computer who can take sounds and images from the culture around us and use it to say things differently. These tools of creativity have become tools of speech. It is a literacy for this generation. This is how our kids speak. It is how our kids think. It is what your kids are as they increasingly understand digital technologies and their relationship to themselves. Now, in response to this new use of culture using digital technologies, the law has not greeted this Sousa revival with very much common sense. Instead, the architecture of copyright law and the architecture of digital technologies as they interact have produced the presumption that these activities are illegal. Because if copyright law at its core regulates something called copies, then in the digital world, the one fact we can't escape is that every single use of culture produces a copy. Every single use, therefore, requires permission. Without permission, you are a trespasser. You're a trespasser with about as much sense as these people were trespassers. Right? Common sense here, though, has not yet revolted in response to this response that the law has offered to these forms of creativity. Instead, what we've seen is something much worse than a revolt. There's a growing extremism that comes from both sides in this debate in response to this conflict between the law and the use of these technologies. One side builds new technologies, such as one recently announced that will enable them to automatically take down from sites like YouTube any content that has any copyrighted content in it, whether or not there's a judgment of fair use that might be applied to the use of that content. And on the other side, among our kids, there's a growing copyright abolitionism, a generation that rejects the very notion of what copyright is supposed to do, rejects copyright and believes that the law is nothing more than an ass to be ignored and to be fought at every opportunity possible. The extremism on one side begets extremism on the other, a fact we should have learned many, many times over. And both extremes in this debate are just wrong. Now, the balance that I try to fight for, I, as any good liberal, tried to fight for first by looking to the government. Total mistake, right? looked first to the courts and the legislatures to try to get them to do something to make the system make more sense. It failed, partly because the courts are too passive, partly because the legislatures are corrupted, by which I don't mean that there's bribery operating to stop real change, but more the economy of influence that governs how Congress functions means that policymakers here will not understand this until it's too late to fix it. So we need something different. We need a different kind of solution. And the solution here, in my view, is a private solution. A solution that looks to legalize what it is to be young again and to realize the economic potential of that. And that's where the story of BMI becomes relevant. Because as BMI demonstrated, competition here can achieve some form of balance. The same thing can happen now. We don't have a public domain to draw upon now, so instead what we need is two types of changes. First, that artists and creators embrace the idea, choose, that their work be made available more freely. So for example, they can say their work is available freely for non-commercial, this amateur type of use, but not freely for any commercial use. And second, we need the businesses that are building out this read-write culture to embrace this opportunity expressly, to enable it, so that this ecology of free content or freer content can grow on a neutral platform where they both exist simultaneously, so that more free can compete with less free, and the opportunity to develop the creativity in that competition can teach one the lessons of the other. Now, I would talk about one particular such plan that I know something about, but I don't want to violate Ted's first commandment of selling, so I'm not going to talk about this at all. I'm instead just going to remind you of the point that BMI teaches us, that artist choice is the key for new technology having an opportunity to be open for business. And we need to build artist choice here if these new technologies are to have that opportunity. But let me end with something I think much more important in business. It's the point about how this connects to our kids. We have to recognize they are different from us. This is us, right? We made mixed tapes, they remix music. We watched TV, they make TV. It is technology that has made them different. And as we see what this technology can do, we need to recognize you can't kill the instinct the technology produces. We can only criminalize it. We can't stop our kids from using it. We can only drive it underground. We can't make our kids passive again. We can only make them, quote, pirates. And is that good? We live in this weird time, this kind of age of prohibitions, where in many areas of our life, we live life constantly against the law. Ordinary people live life against the law, and that's what we are doing to our kids. They live life knowing they live it against the law. That realization is extraordinarily corrosive, extraordinarily corrupting. And in a democracy, we ought to be able to do better at least for them, if not for opening for business. Thank you very much.
네, 여러분 어떻게 그 레시 교수님의 그 강연을 잘 들었어요. 사실 이제 이분은 이런 디지털 기술, 테크놀로지 뭐 이런 것과 관련된 어떤 법에 대해서 굉장히 좀 전문적인 그리고 아마 세계에서도 좀 돋보이는 분이라서 여러분들이 많은 그 시사점을 얻을 수 있을 거라고 생각이 듭니다. 네, 여러분. 그러면 이제 다음 그 레시 교수님의 그 강의는 제가 봐도 참 많이 재밌는 것 같아요. 그래서 굉장히 많은 주제를 사실은 다루는 것이고 여러분 중에도 뭐 디지털 미디어라든지 이런 데 관심 있는 학생도 많을 것 같은데 이제 그런 부분 이야기도 많이 나누고 있죠. 자, 이제 조금 더 다시 이제 더 알고리즘 쪽으로 돌아갈까요? 그러면 알고리즘 편향이라고 하는 것이 예전에 우리 이제 인사채용 시스템에서 예를 들면 그런 거죠. 전통적인 방식으로 하는 뭐 이력서 받고 뭐 이렇게 해서 면접을 통해서 하는 거랑 아니면 인공지능에 의한 알고리즘 예측 모델로 하는 거랑 둘 다 이제 예측을 한다는 것, 앞으로 이제 어떤 사람을 뽑을 거다, 어떤 사람은 괜찮을 거다, 뭐 이런 식으로 하는 것, 의사결정을 한 방법론이기는 하지만 그 두 가지 방법이 어느 쪽이 전적으로 맞고 틀리고 뭐 그렇고 문제로 볼 건 아니라는 거고 밸런스가 중요하다는 거죠. 근데 많은 사람들은 이제 인공지능에 의한 알고리즘이 더 낫다, 또 better solution이라고 많이들 생각하는데 실제로는 또 이 알고리즘 자체의 어떤 또 편향성 이런 것도 있고 특히 이제 이용자 또 객체와의 상호작용 속에서 끊임없이 수정 조정되기 때문에 개발자의 편견이나 선견이 반영이 될 수 있고 또 빅데이터 자체가 과거의 데이터잖아요. 그죠? 그렇기 때문에 과거로부터 쌓여온 데이터를 학습하면서 인종차별이나 성차별 등의 역사적 편향성을 반영할 수 있기 때문에 인공지능 윤리가 더 중요하다는 것을 이야기하는 거죠. 이것 관련해서 이제 사례도 있는데 아까 이제 그 테드 영상에서도 봤듯이 실제로 보면 이제 백인들이 이렇게 더 낫다는 식으로 어떤 되는 것이 뭐 많은 사례들이 있어요. 인종차별이죠, 일종의. 그래서 뭐 온라인 국제 미인대회에 인공지능 뷰티 AI가 여러 가지 평가했는데 우승자 대부분은 백인이 나왔더라라든지 또는 미국에서 대선 여론조작 사건 2014년에 디지털 게리먼더링이라고 하거든요. 이것도 중요한 개념인데 기계학습의 알고리즘적 편견이 반영된 개인 추천 시스템에 의해서 대통령 선거 후보자를 봤더니 유권자 선택에 스팸봇이 트위터나 페이스북이나 이런 소셜 미디어 상에서 여론을 조작하더라는 거죠. 그래서 그때 이제 트럼프가 많이 이제 결과적으로 이제 대통령이 되는데 많이 기여를 한 거죠. 또 그리고 2016년 5월에 뭐 기즈모도라고 하는 이제 IT 매체에서 그 뉴스 편집 서비스인 거 트렌딩 토픽에서 알고리즘이 조작되는 그런 것도 있었고요. 그리고 뭐 어떤 뭐 남성, 여성 또 미의 판별 기준 이런 데서도 보면 이제 조금 편향성, 즉 백인 중심의 편향성이 많이 드러난다는 거죠. 그래서 2016년에 백악관 보고서에서는 알고리즘 규제를 해야 된다라고 하는 내용의 보고서가 나왔어요. 그래서 빅데이터 알고리즘 시스템 기여 시민권이라고 이제 번역되는 이 보고서인데요. 여기에 보면 알고리즘 자체에 4가지 바이어스가 있다고 해요. 그래서 데이터 자체를 잘못 채택하거나 불안전하고 부정확한 시기에 맞지 않는 데이터, 또 우리 편향적인 데이터, 역사적인 편향성을 갖는 데이터 4가지 바이어스가 있어서 알고리즘 규제를 해야 된다는 것인데 뭐 유럽연합에서는 이제 여러분 이제 나중에 개인정보 보호 규정 GDPR이라고 하는 것이 있거든요. 이제 그게 이제 유럽연합 차원의 개인정보 보호법이에요. General Data Protection Regulation. 여기에 이제 알고리즘과 관련해서 뭐 투명성이라든지 프로파일링 또 설명을 요구할 권리 이런 것들을 좀 신설하고 미국에서도 알고리즘 책임법이라는 게 있는데요. 그래서 인공지능 알고리즘을 이용해서 민감한 자동화 시스템을 평가하고 그런데 그런 기업들은 그 일정한 이제 책임을 물는 거죠. 근데 연매출 5천만 달러 이상이거나 100만 명 이상의 개인정보를 취급하는 기업이 대상이 된다. 뭐 이런 것들이 있고요. 이것과 관련해서 이제 투명성, 신뢰성 이게 중요한데 테드 영상을 이제 마지막으로 한번 보면서 이번 주 강의를 마치도록 해요. 그래서 인공지능에서 인간적 편향을 피하는 법이라고 크리티 샤마의 강연을 듣도록 하겠습니다. 네.
How many decisions have been made about you today, or this week, or this year by artificial intelligence? I build AI for a living, so full disclosure, I'm kind of a nerd. And because I'm kind of a nerd, wherever some new news story comes out about artificial intelligence stealing all our jobs, or robots getting citizenship of an actual country, I'm the person my friends and followers message freaking out about the future. We see this everywhere. This media panic that our robot overlords are taking over. We could blame Hollywood for that, but in reality, that's not the problem we should be focusing on. There is a more pressing danger, a bigger risk with AI that we need to fix first. So we are back to this question. How many decisions have been made about you today by AI? And how many of these were based on your gender, your race, or your background? Algorithms are being used all the time to make decisions about who we are and what we want. Some of the women in this room will know what I'm talking about if you've been made to sit through those pregnancy test adverts on YouTube like 1,000 times, or you've scrolled past adverts of fertility clinics on your Facebook feed, or in my case, Indian marriage bureaus. But AI isn't just being used to make decisions about what products we want to buy or which show we want to binge watch next. I wonder how you'd feel about someone who thought things like this. A Black or Latino person is less likely than a white person to pay off their loan on time. A person called John makes a better programmer than a person called Mary. A Black man is more likely to be a repeat offender than a white man. You're probably thinking, wow, that sounds like a pretty sexist, racist person, right? These are some real decisions that AI has made very recently based on the biases it has learned from us, from the humans. AI is being used to help decide whether or not you get that job interview, how much you pay for your car insurance, how good your credit score is, and even what rating you get in your annual performance review. But these decisions are all being filtered through its assumptions about our identity, our race, our gender, our age. How is that happening? Now imagine an AI is helping a hiring manager find the next tech leader in the company. So far, the manager has been hiring mostly men. So the AI learns men are more likely to be programmers than women. And it's a very short leap from there to men make better programmers than women. We have reinforced our own bias into the AI, and now it's screening out female candidates. Hang on, if a human hiring manager did that, we'd be outraged. We wouldn't allow it. This kind of gender discrimination is not okay. And yet somehow, AI has become above the law because a machine made the decision. That's not it. We're also reinforcing our bias in how we interact with AI. How often do you use a voice assistant like Siri, Alexa, or even Cortana? They all have two things in common. One, they can never get my name right. And second, they are all female. They're designed to be your obedient servants, turning your lights on and off, ordering your shopping. You get male AIs too, but they tend to be more high-powered, like IBM Watson making business decisions, Salesforce Einstein, or Ross, the robot lawyer. So poor robots, even they suffer from sexism in the workplace. Think about how these two things combine and affect a kid growing up in today's world around AI. So they're doing some research for a school project, and they Google images of CEO. The algorithm shows them results of mostly men. And now they Google personal assistant. As you can guess, it shows them mostly females. And then they want to put on some music and maybe order some food. And now they're barking orders at a female voice obedient female voice assistant. Some of our brightest minds are creating this technology today. technology that they could have created in any way they wanted. And yet, they've chosen to create it in the style of 1950s Mad Men secretary. Yay. But okay, don't worry. This is not going to end with me telling you that we're all heading towards sexist, racist machines running the world. The good news about AI is that it is entirely within our control. We get to teach the right values, the right ethics to AI. So there are 3 things we can do. 1, we can be aware of our own biases and the bias in machines around us. 2, we can make sure there are diverse teams building this technology. And 3, we have to give it diverse experiences to learn from. I can talk about the first 2 from personal experience. When you work in technology and you don't look like a Mark Zuckerberg or Elon Musk, your life is a little bit difficult. Your ability gets questioned. Here's just one example. Like most developers, I often join online tech forums and share my knowledge to help others. And I've found when I log on as myself with my own photo, my own name, I tend to get questions or comments like this. What makes you think you're qualified to talk about AI? What makes you think you know about machine learning? So, as you do, I made a new profile. And this time, instead of my own picture, I chose a cat with a jetpack on it. And I chose a name that did not reveal my gender. You can probably guess where this is going, right? So this time, I didn't get any of those patronizing comments about my ability, and I was able to actually get some work done. And it sucks, guys. I've been building robots since I was 15. I have a few degrees in computer science. And yet, I had to hide my gender in order for my work to be taken seriously. So what's going on here? Are men just better at technology than women? Another study found that when women coders on one platform hid their gender, like myself, their code was accepted 4% more than men. So this is not about the talent. This is about an elitism in AI that says a programmer needs to look like a certain person. What we really need to do to make AI better is bring people from all kinds of backgrounds. We need people who can write and tell stories to help us create personalities of AI. We need people who can solve problems. We need people who face different challenges. And we need people who can tell us what are the real issues that need fixing, and help us find ways that technology can actually fix it. Because when people from diverse backgrounds come together, when we build things in the right way, the possibilities are limitless. And that's what I want to end by talking to you about. Less racist robots, less machines that are going to take our jobs, and more about what technology can actually achieve. So yes, some of the energy in the world of AI, in the world of technology, is going to be about what ads you see on your stream. But a lot of it is going towards making the world so much better. Think about a pregnant woman in the Democratic Republic of Congo who has to walk 17 hours to her nearest rural prenatal clinic to get a checkup. What if she could get diagnosis on her phone instead? Or think about what AI could do for those 1 in 3 women in South Africa who face domestic violence. If it wasn't safe to talk out loud, they could get an AI service to raise alarm, get financial and legal advice. These are all real examples of projects that people, including myself, are working on right now using AI. So I'm sure in the next couple of days, there will be yet another news story about the existential risk, robots taking over and coming for your jobs. And when something like that happens, I know I'll get the same messages worrying about the future. But I feel incredibly positive about this technology. This is our chance to remake the world into a much more equal place. But to do that, we need to build it the right way from the get-go. We need people of different genders, races, sexualities, and backgrounds. We need women to be the makers and not just the machines who do the maker's bidding. We need to think very carefully what we teach machines, what data we give them, so they don't just repeat our own past mistakes. So I hope I leave you thinking about two things. First, I hope you leave thinking about bias today, and that the next time you scroll past an advert that assumes you are interested in fertility clinics or online betting websites, that you think and remember that the same technology is assuming that a Black man will reoffend, or that a woman is more likely to be a personal assistant than a CEO. And I hope that reminds you that we need to do something about it. And second, I hope you think about the fact that you don't need to look a certain way or have a certain background in engineering or technology to create AI, which is going to be a phenomenal force for our future. You don't need to look like a Mark Zuckerberg. You can look like me. And it is up to all of us in this room to convince the governments and the corporations to build AI technology for everyone, including the edge cases, and for us all to get education about this phenomenal technology in the future. Because if we do that, then we've only just scratched the surface of what we can achieve with AI. Thank you.